For my film presentation, I chose to present on a scene from Double Indemnity. In this scene, Walter and Phyllis meet at a supermarket, and Walter attempts to warn Phyllis that taking the case to court will be both of their undoing. I chose this scene because in it, Phyllis shows her true colors, and Walter realizes just how much of a trap he's laid for himself. The scene begins with Phyllis and Walter meeting each other. We are given a wide shot so we can contrast Phyllis's calm demeanor and Walter's nervous glance. This scene is filmed with a wide shot as we see both Walter and Phyllis. Walter constantly looks around, is notably stiff, and his voice is closer to a low hiss, whereas Phyllis is calm throughout. Her shoulders are relaxed and her voice is soft. It is evident that Phyllis feels no remorse for what she did, yet Walter is eaten up by the guilt. It's Phyllis's calm demeanor which lets us assume that she's the one in control of the situation. The next scene shows Walter taking control as he asks Phyllis what happened to the last Mrs. Dietrichson. This is the first time that Phyllis actually looks up at Walter, and Walter actually stops looking around suspiciously. We are no longer given the view of Walter next to Phyllis, but a view of Phyllis from over Walter's shoulder. The next scene happens as both characters move through the supermarket. This scene not only marks a change in Phyllis's attitude, but in her method. Suddenly there's a shift between her not caring what Walter says and her needing him in her life. This part is important not only because it shows a shift in the scene, but a shift in the entire movie's narrative. It's the first time that Walter not only realizes what he did, but who he did it for. We know that he killed Phyllis's husband because he thought that Phyllis loved him. And yet in this scene, Phyllis makes it very clear that she actually killed her husband for his money. She even uses the line, "Without the money, the murder was for nothing." And yet, as you can see from this image, Phyllis tries to use her body to show Walter that he's still important to her. In using the line, "It's me I'm talking about," she brings Walter's attention back to her. She uses her allure to remind Walter why he did what he did. She tries to remind him of the feeling that he felt when she walked down the stairs the first time they met. This is evident in his posture versus hers. He's looking down on her as if he can't really understand what she's saying, and she's looking up at him, begging him to hear her. This next shot marks a shift in both of their attitudes. As we can see, Phyllis is in deep thought, contemplating what her next move will be, whereas Walter's in the background, watching her. It's the first time he realizes that he might not be able to trust her. From there, we go to a close-up of Phyllis's face. In this scene, her tone is once again calm as she's realized the route that she's going to take. In this part, the most notable line is Phyllis reminding Walter that she never actually planned her husband's death. She simply didn't like him. Here she is making sure that Walter understands the full scope of what he did. The camera then cuts away to Walter's face as he realizes what she's saying. The anger and frustration are evident in the way he clenches his jaw. The line, "Is that what you're really telling me?" has many different meanings, but in essence it's Walter asking if Phyllis would really betray him the way she's saying she would. He's asking why she would risk putting both their necks on the line for money. Finally, Phyllis takes off her glasses as she feels she's made her point clear. The line, "It's straight down the line for both of us," is meant to remind Walter that no matter what happens, they're in this together. This is a sentiment that she's been trying to hammer into Walter throughout the entire scene, but at this point she feels that she's finally made it clear. Her last words are "remember" before she turns and leaves Walter alone in the supermarket. The camera zooms in on Walter's face and continues to zoom until we can see the sweat on his brow. And shortly after, a voiceover begins as Walter's reminded of his boss's words, the words that began his paranoia in the first place. This scene consists of two noir archetypes, the femme fatale, also known as the dangerous woman, and the hard-boiled male protagonist, Walter. Phyllis is the epitome of the femme fatale, because as we can see from the beginning of the scene, she didn't really seem interested in what Walter had to say. It wasn't until he brought up what happened to the last Mrs. Dietrichson that she began to switch methods. It was then that she tried to seduce him, and then when she realized that didn't work, she threatened him. Walter, on the other hand, doesn't really fit the hard-boiled male archetype. Since he's narrating the story, we're made to believe that he was just an innocent man who was thrown into a life of crime. but due to his actions, we can see that he wasn't truly that innocent. And yet in this scene, it's when we start to see his morals push through. It's when he realizes that murdering someone isn't just a solitary act, that there are consequences. Perhaps this is why he got caught, because in the end he could have gotten away with it if his conscience hadn't caught up with him. Finally, we get to theme, but the ones that relate most to this scene are regret, corruption, and greed. Regret is for Walter as he realizes what he's done. Corruption and greed are for Phyllis. Corruption because she got Walter to kill her husband, and then even went as far as to blame. She got Walter to kill her husband, and then when this moral dilemma overtook him, she convinced him that it was his idea in the first place, reminding him that it was not her fault that her husband was dead, but Walter's intervention which caused his death. And lastly, greed, because in the beginning she said all she wanted was out of a loveless marriage. And yet, when the insurance money came in, she decided that she had to take it to court, even though Walter explained to her that that would have been both of their undoing. In the end, this scene is when people's true colors finally start to come through. Walter feels regret for the murder, yet whether it's because he actually killed someone or because he knows he will get caught, we don't actually know. And Phyllis makes it very clear that she doesn't actually care if Walter gets caught. What she does care about is if she doesn't get the money. This film shows two characters attempting to take a shortcut to escape worlds that they're trapped in. Another notable theme in this scene is the feeling of being trapped. This is exemplified at the end of the scene when the camera zooms into Walter's face and we can see the perspiration on his brow. The fear in being caught outweighs the realization that Phyllis just betrayed him. It is at the end of this scene that he realizes that his mistake wasn't in killing Phyllis's husband, but in meeting Phyllis in the first place. Both passion and money are major themes throughout the entire movie. For Walter, it's passion. The passion in being with Phyllis for the rest of his life. And for Phyllis, it's money. The hunger for a life that she could never live, even though she thought she married a rich man. One of the last but most important themes is the theme of violence. In the beginning of the film, it unites Walter and Phyllis, but at the end of the film, it's what Phyllis uses against Walter. It's what gets him to confess, but also it's what makes Walter realize that Phyllis is no good to begin with. For Phyllis, it's a loveless marriage, and for Walter, it's an everyday 9-to-5 job. In the end, they would have gotten away with it if it weren't for